So today I think we're going to talk about the Lost Spanish Mound. It's a legend that's local to the Similkameen and the Okanagan. It's one that I've followed since I was just a young kid. It's always captured my imagination. And I think we'll look at the story itself, some of the evidence, and then I'll come back on and we'll talk about another clue that's not mentioned in the main video. It's got a family connection for me, so I kind of wanted to save that till last. Talk about it myself. Alright guys, let's jump in and we'll see you in about 20 minutes.
Picture this: a lost treasure, a historical mystery, right here in North America. We're talking about the Lost Spanish Mound of the Similkameen.
It's a fantastic local legend, isn't it? From the Similkameen Valley in British Columbia. It hints at this incredible possibility of, well, a real-life treasure hunt.
Exactly. Spanish conquistadors, maybe 300 years ago, supposedly marching into this pretty remote valley and then, poof, gone.
Vanished, leaving just these whispers, these stories, and maybe a hidden cache, a treasure mound.
And this deep dive is perfect if you're looking to get up to speed quickly. Find those little surprising facts, those aha moments, without feeling totally overwhelmed.
Yeah, we've looked at the local stories, some really fascinating artifacts that have popped up, and we're kind of on a quest ourselves today.
A quest for insight, right? And maybe even a clue about where this lost treasure might actually be.
Our goal is really to unpack this story, look hard at the clues, and try to figure out what's fact and what's, well, legend. But keeping an open mind is key here.
Definitely. Because the real treasure might just be the story itself, or the possibility that something is still out there.
Okay, so let's set the scene. Think Similkameen Valley, roughly 1700.
Yeah, forget today's orchards near Costin and Keremeos. This was wilder.
Much wilder. Big pine trees, lots of sagebrush, the Similkameen River winding through, pretty close to the current U.S. border.
And there was a small native village near where Costin is now, people living their lives in this untamed landscape.
And then, according to the legend, the local people see something totally new. A group of men, unfamiliar, coming from the south on horseback, following the river.
Imagine that shock. Fair-skinned men wearing metal clothing.
And riding horses, which the natives likely hadn't seen before. Plus, these large dogs, probably mastiffs. It must have been, well, astonishing, completely alien.
The stories say they were, respectful at first.
Initially, yes, but then things apparently went sour. Conflict broke out.
A battle between the Spanish and the natives.
That's the account. And you have to consider the difference in gear, metal armor, European weapons versus traditional native arms.
Yeah, that wouldn't have been an even fight. The legend mentions native casualties.
Sadly, yes. People killed, injured, and some were apparently taken as slaves.
Okay, so after this clash, the Spanish group, they retreated.
They did. Headed north towards where Keremeos is today, where the valley forks. They took the right fork, following Keremeos Creek for maybe 10 miles.
Okay.
Then they went north again, up a narrower valley, through some pretty rugged country, into Pine Hills.
And eventually down into another valley.
Right, with a river the natives called the Snake River. We know it today as Shingle Creek.
So they kept moving west along this Snake River.
Into the Okanagan Valley, near modern-day Penticton, but they seem to be trying to avoid people now.
Makes sense. After the conflict?
They crossed to the east side of the valley, followed existing native trails north along Okanagan Lake, up towards where Kelowna is now.
And winter was coming on.
Exactly. It was getting late in the year, so they set up a winter camp near Kelowna.
Must have been a tough winter.
Brutal, according to the legend. By spring, supposedly half of them were gone.
Half? Wow. From what?
Starvation, the cold, maybe more fighting that wasn't recorded. We don't really know. But as soon as they could travel, they started heading back south.
Retracing their steps.
Yeah.
Still trying to avoid contact.
Yes. Cross back near Penticton, up the Snake River again, over the divide, and back down towards the Similkameen Valley.
But things had changed back there.
Oh, yes. The natives had the whole winter to prepare. They knew the likely route the Spanish would take to return.
So an ambush was waiting.
Near Keremeos Creek, yeah. As the weakened Spanish group entered the valley, a much larger native force attacked.
In this time.
Overwhelming numbers. Despite the armor and weapons the Spanish still had, they were just overrun. The legend is very clear, none survived.
And their belongings. This is the treasure part.
Right. Their bodies, their gear weapons, armor, maybe personal items, gold perhaps, everything except maybe a few bits and pieces was supposedly piled together.
And covered with dirt.
Exactly. Creating this feature in the landscape that became known as the Lost Spanish Mound. Imagine what could still be buried there.
Okay, that's the core legend. It's dramatic, it's got conflict, survival, and this lost treasure angle. Yeah. Pretty compelling.
Very compelling. But now we have to put on our skeptical hats, Let's look at the actual physical clues people point to.
Like those paintings. The prisoner paintings.
Yeah, west of keremeos on a rock face. Pictographs.
And the common interpretation really flicks the story, right? 4 figures, natives maybe, tied at the neck.
Supposedly roped or chained, yeah. Surrounded by dog-like figures, and there's a rider on horseback nearby. People see that and think, conquistador and his captives.
It fits the narrative perfectly. Treasure, conquest.
It does, but when you look really closely, things get a bit fuzzier. For instance, the paint pigments seem different, meaning it might not be one single scene. It could be 2 different panels painted at different times by different artists.
Okay, so not necessarily one connected story. What about the rider?
Well, it's definitely a rider, but does it have to be a conquistador? There's nothing definitively Spanish about it, no symbols of power or specific gear shown. It could just be a rider.
And the figures? The ones supposedly chained?
That line connecting them. Is it definitely a chain or rope? Could it represent something else? A path? A family connection? We're interpreting a lot.
And the dogs. Are we sure they're dogs, not coyotes or other animals?
Exactly. So while the pictographs are incredibly intriguing and they could relate, they aren't slam dunk proof of conquistadors.
Okay, not definitive. What else? There was a sword found, wasn't there?
Ah, yes, the sword. Found way up at the north end of Okanagan Lake. That caused some excitement.
I bet. The idea being it was taken from the defeated Spanish and traded north. A real link.
That was the hope, a tangible piece of the story, maybe even from the mound itself originally, but when experts examined it, it turned out to be Sri Lankan.
Sri Lankan? Seriously? How?
Yeah, mass-produced around that same time period, used as a trade item all over the world.
Wow. Okay,
Yes.
So could the Spanish have had a Sri Lankan sword?
It's possible, yeah. They were global traders. But it's just as likely, maybe even more likely, it got there through other trade routes, maybe coastal exploration or native trade networks.
So another intriguing artifact, but not conclusive proof of these specific Spanish. Where is it now?
It's in the Penticton Museum. You can go see it. Fascinating, but doesn't seal the deal.
Right. Okay, what about finds in the Similkameen Valley itself?
Yeah.
Grave sites.
Yes. Around the turn of the 20th century, there was a reported discovery in a native grave. Copper plates and an iron spear tip.
Copper plates. Armor. Like scales.
That was the initial thought. There were 8 of them. But here's the catch. Not all of them had holes, the perforations you'd need to lace them together as overlapping scale armor.
Huh. So maybe not armor then. What else could they be?
Good question. Decorative items. Parts of a box. Maybe some kind of status symbol or even a form of currency.
And where did the copper come from? Could it be Spanish?
It's possible, but copper was also traded inland from the coast. Ships carried copper sheathing and goods. Really analyzing the metal's composition might tell us more.
That would be interesting. And the spear tip. Iron. That sounds more European.
It does sound suggestive, but again, iron wasn't unknown. Extensive native trade networks existed long before Europeans arrived in numbers inland. An iron spear tip could have traveled a very long way through trade.
So again, suggestive but not definitive. These trade networks complicate things.
You really do. You can't just assume an out-of-place item means direct European contact at that specific spot.
Okay, there were also copper tubes mentioned, right? Found in the same area.
Yes, and other places on the interior plateau too. These are quite interesting finely made tubes rolled from single sheets of copper or a copper alloy.
How big are they?
Usually a few inches long. They have this old patina, but sometimes look like they might have been kept polished. The edges are almost seamless. Really good craftsmanship.
And didn't they find something inside them?
Yeah, sometimes remnants of cordage preserved by the copper itself.
So what were they for? Decorative?
That's the most likely guess. Worn like beads in a necklace, maybe? Or adorning clothing or breastplates, similar to how porcupine quills were used?
Valuable items, perhaps, but any link to the Spanish?
Not directly. Where did the copper sheet come from? Again, maybe trade. One slightly wilder guess someone had was maybe later, from discarded Chinese opium tins, but that's pure speculation. No solid link to conquistadors.
Right. Now, what about that large log structure near Kelowna? That sounds potentially significant.
It really does. Discovered back in the late 1860s by a settler named Isidore Boucherie. Huge structure, like 35 by 75 feet.
Made of cedar and showing axe marks.
Iron axe marks, yeah. And it looked old. What's really intriguing is there are no records of Hudson's Bay Company or other trading posts or early pioneers building anything that big right there around that time.
So the theory is this could be the winter shelter the Spanish group built.
Exactly. It fits the legend's location for their overwintering. The size suggests a large group needed shelter.
And the construction style.
Using whole logs and logs split in half, it's a quick way to build if you have enough people, and crucially, iron tools like axes. You'd probably need, 18, 20 people working on it.
So it supports the idea of a large group needing winter shelter.
It strongly supports that part of the story, yeah. A non-native group with iron tools was there overwintering. But does it prove they were Spanish? No. Could have been another group, maybe explorers we don't know about.
Supportive, but not conclusive.
Okay, one more artifact pendant.
Right, found in a native grave near Okanagan-Falls, early 1900s. Described as polished turquoise, or maybe opal.
Turquoise? It's not really local, is it? Sounds more southwestern. Generally, yeah. Finding turquoise that far north could suggest a link to Spanish territory, maybe brought up as a trade item or even a trophy.
Or trade networks again.
Or trade networks again. You see the pattern.
I do. What if it was opal?
Well, that's less unusual. There actually are local opal deposits in the Okanagan Similkameen area, so an opal pendant wouldn't necessarily be out of place at all.
It'd be great if we knew where that pendant was now to examine it.
Absolutely. But like many early finds, its current location might be unknown.
Okay, so the physical evidence is intriguing, but full of questions.
Yeah.
Let's rethink the mound itself, the burial.
Yeah, let's do a little thought experiment. You're the native group. You've just won this major battle. You have dozens of bodies to deal with.
No modern shovels, no earth-moving equipment.
Exactly. Is digging a massive pit and then piling earth on top to create a distinct mound really the most practical solution?
Probably not. That sounds like a huge amount of work.
But might be easier. Remember that talus slope near Keremeos Creek we mentioned earlier? The slope of rock debris? Native groups in the area often use talus slopes or rock crevices for burying their own dead. It's much less labor-intensive than digging in soil.
So maybe they just place the bodies amongst the rocks on a slope.
It's a possibility. It would achieve the goal of disposing of the bodies without the massive effort of building a mound from scratch. The mound might not be a deliberate construction at all.
That changes the treasure hunt aspect a bit, doesn't it? If there's no single, deliberately built mound to find.
It certainly makes it more complicated. And it leads to another question. How did this story get attached to Spanish conquistadors specifically?
Good point. How would the natives in 1700 have known the difference between Spanish, French, English, or any other Europeans?
Unlikely they would have. The original story passed down orally probably just spoke of foreign travelers or strangers from the south.
And the Spanish label got added later. Maybe because Spanish exploration was more famous elsewhere?
Quite possibly. It makes the story more dramatic, connects it to known history, but it might not reflect the original account.
Also, the motive. Gold. Right, that's the classic conquistador goal?
Usually, yes. But if they were after gold, first, why is there no record of this expedition in Spanish archives? A trip this far north would have been significant.
And second?
Second, if they came up the Similkameen River, they would have passed very close to Rich Bar, just south of the border in the U.S.
Rich Bar? Wasn't that one of the earliest gold strikes in the region?
Exactly, a major early gold rush area. If these guys were laser-focused on gold, why would they seemingly ignore or bypass Rich Bar and continue north into less promising territory? It doesn't quite add up.
Okay, so if maybe they weren't Spanish and maybe they weren't primarily after gold, What's the alternative?
This is where it gets really interesting. There's another theory. Shipwreck survivors.
Shipwreck? From where?
Remember the Spanish galleon, the Santa Crista de Burgos?
Vaguely. Wasn't it lost?
Yes. Sailed from the Philippines in 1693, packed with valuable trade goods, silks, porcelain, beeswax, bound for Acapulco, Mexico. And it just disappeared. Never officially found.
Okay, where does that connect?
Well, there's compelling evidence. Its wreck site is actually off the coast of Oregon, near Nehalem Spit.
Evidence like what?
Like chunks of beeswax marked with Spanish shipping symbols identical to those used by the shippers on the Santa Crista de Burgos, washing ashore there for centuries. Lewis and Clark even documented it.
Wow. Okay, that's pretty strong evidence for a wreck there.
And local native traditions on the Oregon coast also talk about a shipwreck and survivors around that time.
Survivors. So the idea is these could be the foreign travelers who ended up in the Similkameen.
Precisely. Imagine surviving a shipwreck on the Oregon coast in the 1690s. You're lost, disoriented. Maybe you head inland, trying to go north, hoping to reach somewhere civilized. You might not even realize how far north you are.
And the timeline fits. 1693 wreck, maybe a few years wandering inland, showing up in the Similkameen around 1700.
The timeline aligns remarkably well, and they might have salvaged some goods from the wreck, things that seemed valuable or useful.
Which could account for some of the treasure aspects of the legend.
Exactly. But here's the real twist.
There's more.
Think about the crew of a Spanish galleon back then. Who was actually on the ship?
Spanish sailors? Officers?
Some, yes. The officers would be Spanish, but the vast majority of the crew, maybe 90%, they would have been Filipino.
Filipino, really?
Absolutely. Manila was the starting point. So if survivors from the Santa Crista de Burgos made it inland and trekked north,
They wouldn't have been primarily Spanish at all.
they'd have been mostly Filipino. Which means maybe we shouldn't be talking about the Lost Spanish Mound.
But the lost Filipino mound.
It's a fascinating possibility, isn't it? It reframes the entire story. Lost travelers, yes. Conflict, possibly. Buried belongings, maybe. But Spanish conquistadors? Perhaps not.
It definitely gives you something to think about. So, pulling it together, the core story is foreign travelers, whoever they were, arrived in the Similkameen maybe 325 years ago.
Around 1700, give or take, something happened. Conflict, death, and maybe things left behind.
And this brings us to something really important, especially if this story makes you want to go exploring. Respect.
Absolutely crucial. If you're out hiking, exploring, anywhere, really, and you stumble across something that looks old, unusual, maybe culturally significant,
Skulls, old metal, strange carving.
anything like that, the first thing is be respectful. If it seems like a new discovery, something not obviously marked or known,
You need to let someone know, right?
yes, notify the proper authorities. That could be the local First Nation band office, a local museum, or the provincial archaeology branch.
And note the location carefully. GPS coordinates if you can, or mark it on a map.
Critically important. But the most important thing,
Don't touch it.
don't touch it, don't dig around it, don't move it. Just observe, record the location, and report it.
Why is disturbing it so bad?
Because context is everything in archaeology. The moment you move something, you erase vital information about its position, its relationship to the soil, and anything else around it. You diminish its historical value, potentially forever. The story it could tell gets damaged.
So look, appreciate, record, report, but do not disturb.
Exactly. The lore of this legend, the potential treasure, persists because we don't have the full story. The truth is still elusive.
And maybe the only way we'll get closer is if people keep talking about it, keep researching responsibly, and treat any potential sites with that respect we just talked about.
Yeah, the mystery indoors.
So that was quite a journey. We've explored the legend, picked apart the evidence, the paintings, the sword, the copper bits, the log house, and looked at this whole other shipwreck angle.
It shows how complex these local histories can be, doesn't it?
Definitely. And makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other stories, what other forgotten histories, or even, treasures might be hidden right under our noses in our own local landscapes.
And maybe the real treasure isn't always gold or artifacts, but the knowledge, the understanding we gain from piecing together the past.
Yeah. The story of the Lost Spanish, or maybe Filipino Mound, is a great reminder that history is often way more surprising and tangled than we think. These local legends, they hold clues, they push us to look closer at the ground beneath our feet.
Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed that story. It's, like I said, it's one that's always fascinated me. And without further hesitation, let's talk about the final clue that I've saved till last. Last little bit of evidence here. So back in early 1920s, there's two cowboys and they're riding through the South Similkameen Valley, quite near the border. And I'm not sure what they were up to. Maybe they were prospecting, maybe they were looking for cattle. Could have been anything, right? And anyways, they're traveling along. They stumbled across an old native grave. Now, unfortunately, things were a little bit different back then. And didn't take them too long to jump off their horses and have a good poke around kind of thing, right? And, there was some stone tools and artifacts and whatnot kicking around. Not sure if there was any, actual human remains left. But one of the things they found was a copper or brass club, about just over a foot long. And it was in the shape of a serpent. Now this was a very uncommon find for any native grave in the interior of British Columbia. And they knew it. They knew it was special. And they decided, maybe they should just leave well enough alone, put it back where it was, maybe notify a university or something like that. Which was pretty progressive thinking for back in those days. Anyways, so they put everything back the way they found it and carried on. Now, a few weeks later, cowboy number 1, he's in the area and he decides he's going to check on this grave and just make sure nobody else has stumbled across it. And he rides up to it and he can tell just from sitting on his horse that this club is gone. And he's pretty disappointed because he knows who's probably taking it, right? And so he talks to his partner there, cowboy number 2. Cowboy number 2 says, yeah, I liberated it and I sold it to a guy in the States. Disappointing, but that stuff happened back then. Fast forward to about 2010. My grandfather and I were chatting about the Spanish Mound, the Lost Spanish Mound. And he was a bit of a local historian. He collected local antiques and had a pretty good reputation. Bill Barley used to come to him and consult on different matters. He grew up in basically the town site of Fairview. So yeah, he was pretty familiar with the South Okanagan and the Similkameen. Anyways, we're chatting about the Lost Spanish Mound. I put forth, I said, I think maybe, I have an idea of what that brass or copper club actually was, where it came from. And he kind of looked a little surprised and raised an eyebrow. I said, yeah, a lot of the old trade guns, they had a brass serpent mounted on the forestock. And maybe that's actually what this was. And, if the rest of the gun had just rotted away, or maybe it had just been kept as a decorative piece, right? And over the years, maybe the story got embellished and it turned into a club, and, you know how stories go, right? And he kind of smiled and he went, nah, I don't think that's quite it. Anyway, gee, I thought I had a pretty good idea here, right? And I said, so what makes you think differently? He said, well, it was round and it was, a little over a foot long, and not something that was attached to the side of a rifle, not by any means. All right, well, how do you know this? And he kind of grinned and said, well, cowboy number 1 was your great uncle. And so I heard firsthand, I had a pretty good description of what this thing looked like. And I was shocked because, it wasn't a story that he had conveyed at any earlier time that I'm aware of. Probably kept it to himself. He didn't want to bring any shame to the family or anything like that. And the great uncle, he was murdered back in the 50s, so he wasn't a source of information for me later on in life. Anyways, yeah, so we know that this brass or copper club was sold to a collector in the United States. And you know what? There's a really good chance that it's still out there somewhere. Either in somebody's personal collection, maybe in a museum by now, or maybe just in a back room of somebody's house or a museum. Who knows? People probably don't really realize what it is. But if you're out there and you know where this piece is, by all means, I would love to hear from you. I don't want to see it returned to anybody or change hands or anything like that. It's been where it is for however long, but I think it'd be fantastic to actually get a look at it and see what this thing is all about. And maybe we can determine its origin. Does it have any link to the Spanish Mound? Not really sure, but it's definitely another out of place artifact. So could be. Who knows? I seriously believe that that there's some truth to this legend. I think there probably was people that ended up in the valley in the early 1700s. I think there's a good chance that there was a conflict and they were later dispatched. It's just kind of fits, right? So I think there is this treasure out there waiting to be found somewhere, and boy, if we can find it, that'll kind of rewrite local history. So keep your eyes open if you're out and about in the bush. And like I say, if you know where this brass or copper serpent-shaped club is, love to see it. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed the story. There's lots more to come. Make sure you like and subscribe. Very important. It's going to encourage me to make further content. And yeah, like I say, we've got a few more stories coming at you real soon. So, all right, guys, cheers.